Extra Ecclesiam Nulla Salus. Outside the church, there's no salvation. This is a strong statement that Catholics and other Christians have echoed through the centuries since the time of Cyprian. And the statement arose out of, as much theology did, a real practical context where the validity of baptism was being challenged by heretics. So a lot of theology emerged out of a conflict with heretics. It's not something to romanticize, like, oh, well, these heretics were espousing this view of Christian theology, and Athanasius and Cyprian come along and they kind of just set them straight, give them the correct interpretation, and things were fine. I mean, these conflicts were political, with political personages weighing in, emperors and others, and they had political consequences, and they were as dirty as all politics is. And that's the context of theology. It's kind of a messy thing, right? And so we had this persecution, and some Christians had sacrificed to pagan idols, or purchased documents saying they did. So they kind of took the easy way out. And others, stood strong against the demands and suffered persecution as a result. And so, whose baptism was? And they kind of, over time, the conflicts kind of separated the churches in North Africa here in this case, and so you have these other sects emerging that see themselves as the true church. And this is going to be repeated in Augustine's time. The Donatist controversies. And in fact, in the Donatist controversies, both the schismatic, heretical Donatists as well as Augustine himself both appealed to Cyprian to make their arguments. And this is one of the reasons that Cyprian is so important. Who's right? I mean, isn't the question of the true church an important question for us today? What does it mean to be the church? Whose church? Who decides? The Nazarene Church, the Evangelical Church more generally, more progressive liberal churches, Catholic Church, or none of those? Well, for Cyprian, the church is like Noah's Ark. And it's very clear from that metaphor that there is no salvation outside of Noah's Ark, just as there is no salvation outside the church. And he really sees kind of the church as being this kind of lifeboat in this really turbulent, stormy, destructive, violent world that we all inhabit. And the church is what saves us. He refers to Mother Church several times, the motherhood of the church. I'm hoping that's a phrase, an image that we'll return to in a more sustained manner at some point in this course. But there's no salvation outside of Noah's Ark, and there's no salvation outside of the church. And who gets to decide where the church is? Who gets to decide who's inside the church and who's outside the church? Well, that happened in these messy political ways, with a lot of arguments, a lot of councils. I'm sure there was no money changed under the table or anything like that, right? But that's exactly how these arguments developed. And so when you feel frustrated about the arguments that we find ourselves in today, the conflicts today about the role of the church in politics, the role of the church in North America, what it means to be the church today. Maybe our times are not so different. Maybe we're once again finding ourselves kind of thrown into, against our will, these conflicts that are going to decide the future of orthodoxy for Christianity. And one of the reasons that baptism became a lightning rod is baptism was not the empty symbolism that it is for us today. Baptism, we've made it into, in many Protestant churches, more of a testimony of our own faith. And so some of the times, even I think it's becoming more prominent, we feel like as we grow in our faith, we need to retestify, we need to be rebaptized. That was unthinkable for someone like Cyprian, which is why they were arguing about whether the baptism of heretics was sufficient when people left the heretical movements and came back into the Catholic churches. And so in the Church of Rome, the Bishop of Rome, the policy there was the baptism of heretics was sufficient. It's baptism, not the one who administers it, that matters. And this will become the debate with Augustine and the Donatists later. But for Cyprian, there's one faith and there's one church. And anything that happens outside of that church, outside of Noah's Ark, is not efficacious. It's not salvific. There's no thing saving there. And so you had to be baptized in the church or you weren't baptized at all. And so he argues that even if you're baptized by martyrdom, right, outside the church, the martyrdom of heretics does not affect their salvation. How could water baptism affect our salvation then, administered by heretics, right? So for him, the question of baptism is a question, like for us today, I think the closest we would get is the debate about evolution in Genesis. If evolution is right and Genesis is wrong, then our whole faith is suspect for some reason, right? This is how Cyprian felt about the baptism of heretics. If their baptism is efficacious, then doesn't that call into question the entire Christian faith, the church itself, and everything that goes with it? One thing, real quickly, Cyprian often referred back to Tertullian's prior work on baptism in the church. He spoke of Tertullian as the master. Now, master has a lot of baggage out of American slavery, but throughout most of history, you would refer to someone as a master because of their competence, how much they had mastered a particular field or topic, a master craftsman. We still often in the martial arts will refer to the sensei as master, not because we're submitting necessarily, but recognizing the proficiency of that one. And so Cyprian referred to Tertullian as the master. And Tertullian, I think he was a little bit somewhat unique. I know that somewhat and unique don't actually make grammatical sense. But we don't find this in a lot of other sources. He identified these four gifts of baptism, what he called the remission of sins, the deliverance from death, coming from Romans chapter 6, regeneration, which leads into sanctification, right? And you see some of that in Cyprian's writings here in letter 72, 73 in our text, but traditional letter 72, and the bestowal of the Holy Spirit, which we see that in Acts, in the New Testament a lot. And so these were not mere symbols. The baptism was not mere symbolism as like it is for us today. Like it's just a testimony I'm giving. It's a symbolic entry. No, this is not what baptism was for Cyprian or Tertullian or folks back in the time. Baptism was efficacious, but only if it was done the right way. Baptism was transformative. It actually changed us. So in Augustine's Confessions, we'll read about a guy who was sick and ill and unconscious, right? And they thought he was going to die. And if you died without being baptized, there was no hope for you, right? Which led into all kinds of other theological developments in the Catholic Church. So the guy was baptized while he was unconscious so that he would not die unbaptized. And Augustine recounts that after baptism, the guy's health was restored and he was a new person. He was objectively changed. Now we think that that baptism has to be a voluntary thing of someone who's actually got the cognitive maturation to recognize what they're doing in baptism. We're making it all about us when we do that. We're making it align with American individualism and Western liberalism. And no one thought that before, like John Locke invented the idea of liberalism. Baptism was not about us, but it was about the faith. It was about the church. And that mattered.